I live alone in a house and have lived here for 2 years now. This is an event that took place several months back and is still very fresh in my memory. So it was nighttime and I was alone in my house and in my bedroom. The house is not very large and my room is on the ground level. As I was watching TV and sitting on my bed, it was starting to get late and was maybe 11 or 12. Because it was late, things were very quiet aside from the volume on my TV, which was not that loud. All of a sudden, I heard this noise from the back end of my house. It sounded like maybe from the backyard, and it seemed like somebody had hit a back window. Before I could compute what was going on in my head though, I heard glass breaking. The sound was coming from the same area. Then I knew that somebody was breaking in. My first reaction at that point was to run to my bedroom door and lock it, which I did. I heard whoever had gotten in the house was still at the back side of it. Then my next course of action was to dial 911. I went over and located my phone, which was also on my bed. I quickly scrambled to dial for the police. Then I went to the back corner of my room. As soon as someone answered the phone, I said that my house was being broken into. I gave my address, but I spoke as quietly as I could. I didn't really hear anything during that time as far as where the intruder was, but maybe 30 seconds later, I heard the footsteps approaching the hallway where my bedroom is. Then, moments later, they arrived right outside my door. I muted the phone and tossed it aside in a panic. I didn't want them to hear me. Then, the intruder tried opening my bedroom door. That got me really scared because I had hoped that maybe they wouldn't want to be seen. I felt like they knew I was in here, but possibly they just wanted to see what was in the room. Maybe they just wanted to steal stuff. But now they were coming straight for me. After the door did not open from being locked, I heard a loud man's voice. He yelled for me to open the door now. It was very angry, and of course, I was not going to do that. After a few seconds, he banged on the door very hard 2 times. At that point, I just wanted to get out of there. I debated trying to open my bedroom window and jump out of it, or I could look around and see if I had anything to use as a weapon. I didn't really have much of anything though. I was heading over to the window and the guy started to walk away. Then I stopped. If he was leaving, I didn't want to run into him out of the house. I wasn't sure where he was going though or what he was doing, but I was just moving off of instincts at that point. My mind barely was even thinking at all. I don't even know how long this went on, but I was basically just pacing around and listening for the man. I didn't really hear much though. After I have no idea how long, I heard my back door opening. Then, probably like 30 seconds to a minute later, I heard noises out front. I still thought that it was the man, but it was actually the police. They came inside and I finally left my room. After searching the house, the man had left out the back door just a short time earlier. Some other cops searched the neighborhood and were able to find the man. He was caught just a block away, which made me feel 100 times better. I didn't know who he was or why he chose to break into my house. I'm really glad that my bedroom door had a lock on it though. If not, I'm not sure what would have happened. The house my husband and I have lived in for a while now has an Airbnb next door as neighbors. It has been operating for close to a year now as an Airbnb. My husband and I often notice the guests coming and going. Most of them would stay to themselves, and a few would talk to us, but they were all nice people. However, one night in late September, we encountered some creepy guests who were staying at the Airbnb. It was a warm evening, and we were settling down to watch a movie when I noticed movement outside. I glanced out the window and saw a younger-looking couple in the Airbnb's backyard. They seemed to be setting up something odd with candles and laying other things down on the ground. I showed my husband and we both agreed that it was strange. Our best guess was they were setting up some sort of ritual. However weird it was, everyone has their own unique hobbies, and who were we to judge what they wanted to do with their time at the Airbnb? We watched them for a while, unable to tear our eyes away. Firstly, it was just fun to watch, but also, we wanted to make sure that nothing extremely creepy was going on. They took a while to set up, so eventually we got bored and went back to watching our movie. Before going to bed, I checked out the window to see if the young couple was still out there. They still appeared to be just hanging out with whatever stuff they had set up, so I dismissed it and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I was gradually awoken by sounds coming through our bedroom window that was open for air. I could hear soft murmurs outside, low and rhythmic. I glanced at the clock, which showed that it was past 2 a.m. now. I woke up my husband, and we went to check out why the neighbors were still up at this time. We got out of bed and made our way to the back of the house and looked out the back window towards the backyards. Surprisingly, this time the young couple was in our backyard, standing and making strange movements in the flickering candlelight. It appeared they were doing whatever ritual thing they had set up earlier. What was even stranger was there were some lights in the woods, which were way out on the property away from our house. I guess the couple had set up some candles way out in the woods as well, but I wasn't sure. It didn't make sense. Somehow, it felt scarier to go outside and confront the couple about being on our property, rather than just let them continue what they were doing. We double-checked the house, locking all our doors and windows just in case before going back to bed. The next morning when we woke up, we cautiously walked into our backyard, checking to see if anything was damaged. It looked like the couple from the Airbnb had already left, since their car was gone. Everything was normal in our backyard, thankfully, besides a note that we found in the middle of the lawn pinned down by a rock. I bent down and picked up the small piece of paper and unfolded it to read it. It read, "Thank you for your participation. You have been blessed. Nothing major happened to us in our yard that night, but it was just really creepy in general. We left a message with the owner of the Airbnb, recommending not to let that young couple stay in again in the future if they tried to." It was a Friday night, and my friends and I decided to hang out at the park. We were bored, and the night felt perfect for some fresh air. Around 10 p.m., we heard a car approaching. It was slow, the headlights cutting through the darkness. At first, we didn't think much of it, but then we noticed it was moving towards us. As it got closer, we could see that it was an old beat-up sedan with the windows tinted, so we couldn't see who was inside. "Probably just somebody passing through," I said, trying to shrug it off. But as soon as it got closer, the car stopped right in front of us. We looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The engine idled, and the driver's side window rolled down. Staring out the window that had just been rolled down was a clown, complete with a painted face and wild hair. He had a wide grin that looked more unsettling than friendly. "What's up, kids?" he shouted, his voice high-pitched, and he asked us if we needed a ride. We all exchanged nervous glances. Nobody said anything, and we just hoped that he would drive away. There was something off about him, his smile and the way his eyes seemed to be darting around. The clown called out to us again, saying, "Come on, don't be shy." My friend Sarah was the first one to say anything, as she whispered to us that we should leave, her voice shaking. She stood up, and we all followed her lead, backing away from the bench. "Wait, where are you going?" the clown asked, still grinning. "I'm just trying to be friendly," he said. We turned and ran towards the nearest exit of the park. I looked back once, and the clown was still sitting there, his smile now more sinister. We didn't stop running until we reached my house. Out of breath, we piled into the living room, slamming the door behind us. We tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted. We were all on edge, checking the windows to make sure that the clown wasn't following us. We eventually relaxed a bit and put on a movie. Hours passed, and at around 1 a.m. after the movie was over, my friends began to leave one by one. After the last one left, I locked the door and turned off the lights. I settled onto the couch, thinking I might finally get some sleep. But then I heard a faint sound outside, an engine slowly driving up the street. I walked quietly to the window and peeked through the blinds. There it was, the same old sedan from earlier, and the window rolled down with that same clown staring straight at my house. His face was illuminated by the dashboard lights, and his grin seemed wider than before. He just sat there, motionless, as if waiting for me to make a move. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself or risk being seen. I stayed away from the window, pacing in the dark. The engine continued to run, and I could hear the faint sound of some circus tune music playing. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I didn't want to look, but curiosity gnawed at me, so I moved back to the window to take a look outside. I could see the clown now tapping his fingers against the steering wheel, still wearing that disturbing grin. Suddenly, he turned his head towards my window, as if sensing I was watching. My heart stopped, and I ducked down quickly, wondering if he had seen me. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the car door slam. I held my breath, waiting for the sound of footsteps, but instead, I heard the engine rev and the car speed off into the night. That image of the car and clown inside scared me for a while, and for the next couple weeks I was paranoid, always checking around me if it was nearby, especially at night. This is something that happened several years ago. It was sometime in the fall, and one Friday afternoon, I went to a pumpkin patch with my girlfriend. This was our first trip to a pumpkin patch that year, and my girlfriend wanted to get pumpkins that we could carve. The place that we were going to also had some other things, like a walking trail, a souvenir shop, and a corn maze as well. But overall, it was smaller, and it wasn't one of those places that 1,000 people go to every weekend. This was more of a local farm. When we got there, it was right after the place opened and nobody else was there. We parked in a grass field, and it didn't even have any other cars in it. I noticed that there appeared to be one employee there, because there was a guy standing near the entrance of the pumpkin patch. I assumed him to be the owner of the farm. Before going there though, we walked down the path and the trail that it had around the farm. That took maybe 20 minutes or so. The path went around the farm and then ended right near the pumpkins. When we got there, I remember that we saw the guy standing there and said hi to him. He said hi as well. The man was about average height, was wearing sunglasses, a hat, and a t-shirt. Then we started walking through the massive field of pumpkins. I thought that it was a little bit strange that we were still the only people there, but it didn't really seem that crazy. There were a lot of pumpkins to choose from, so we wanted to get ones that were near perfect, and we took our time looking through them. I remember after walking down to one end, I noticed that the guy that worked there was kind of walking towards us. I didn't know why, but when he got like 50 feet away, he just kind of stopped and looked at the pumpkins. I looked over at him and then back to looking for a pumpkin. We went to basically all parts of the giant field. So when we were on another end a little while later, I remember seeing the guy kind of walking towards us yet again, but he didn't approach us that time either. He just stopped a ways away. I wasn't sure if he was watching us or what. Either way, it seemed kind of weird. A while later, we found one pumpkin for my girlfriend, and I was still looking for one for myself. I remember noticing that the man was just flat out staring in our direction. He was standing like right in the middle of the patch, just looking at us. The guy was beginning to give us the creeps a little bit, so we decided to wrap things up as quick as possible and get out of there. Within the next couple of minutes, I found the perfect pumpkin and we went up to buy them. By now, the man had gone back to his place at the little table that was near the entrance. When we reached him with our pumpkins, I put them on the table and I said hi to the man. He finally spoke again, saying hi in a quiet and sort of unfriendly way. I started to reach for my wallet, but the man then said that we could just have the pumpkins. I was shocked. I asked why, and he said that it was no problem and we could just have them for free. Well, I wasn't going to question it anymore, but it sure seemed odd. My girlfriend and I just said thanks to the guy and then we left. We walked out to the car and then got inside. I remember that I was driving off and I noticed that the guy was just staring at us. He was sure an interesting character to say the least. The whole farm seemed pretty strange that day. Well, the very next day after that, my girlfriend showed me something on her phone. It was a news story on some website. It said that a pumpkin farm, the same one that we had been to, had been the scene of a crime. The owner of the farm had been beaten by a man and locked in a shed. The man who did it had been on the run, but the farmer was able to get out of the shed and call police eventually, and they located the man within 12 hours on the other side of town. When I saw a picture of the man that was caught, it was the same guy who had been working at the farm. So we had talked to the criminal, and not even the actual farmer. I really couldn't believe it. That explained why everything was so odd. Obviously, we had no idea that any of that was going on. Looking back, I don't know what else might have happened, but I'm glad that we got out of there when we did. Each year when I was a kid, we would celebrate New Year's Eve and stay up late. Normally, I would go to bed at about 10 o'clock, but on New Year's Eve, I would stay up until around 2 a.m. My sister and my parents and I would play board games and watch movies. We would then watch the ball drop when it was midnight and would stay up for several more hours. I think this happened when I was about 12 years old. That time, like any other, we played games and watched a couple of movies. This continued well past midnight, and at roughly 2 a.m., we all got tired and finally decided to go to bed. We could sleep in the next day because nobody had work or school. Our house was on a pretty quiet street. Other than that, it was a pretty typical neighborhood. I stayed up a little bit later than everybody else that night because I was watching a movie in the living room. When it ended, I finally went to bed. I remember getting back into my bedroom and turning out the lights. When I did, I could see very clearly into the front yard because of the moonlight. There was a woman standing in our yard. She was not facing me, and I didn't recognize her. I walked over to the window, and when I did, the woman turned and faced me. She saw me and then started to walk closer into my direction. This really creeped me out. Nobody was supposed to be in our front yard. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I moved away from the window and hid. I ducked down and laid on the floor so that she couldn't see me. My window was pretty large, and I did not have a cover on it at the time. Now, my bedroom was also on the second floor, so she couldn't directly reach me, but I was still terrified. I waited there, just hoping that she would go away. A few minutes went by. Then I heard something hit my window. I wasn't sure as to what it was. I started watching my window, and something else hit it. The woman was throwing sticks at it. She was trying to get my attention, and I don't know why, but I got up. I carefully looked out of the window again. The woman was still there and looking right up at me, this time closer. She said something, but I couldn't hear her. Then I saw her motioning for me to let her inside. I was not going to do that. She then walked to the side of the yard near the front door. Then she knocked on the front door. I didn't move. I was hoping that my parents or sister would wake up. I didn't have the thought to call the police for some reason. It just never entered my mind. The woman knocked on the door on and off for like 5 minutes. Finally, she walked away. I watched her from the window walk to the end of the driveway and then a little ways down. She then got inside of a vehicle and drove off. The whole situation was really bizarre, and it really confused me. The next morning, I told my parents about it. They had no idea what she could have been doing either. Luckily, though, she never came back. I was selling a desk on Facebook Marketplace a few years ago. It was a pretty nice desk in my opinion, and I had bought it from IKEA just 2 years prior. However, I was going to be moving and I decided to get rid of it. During this time, I lived in a smaller house by myself. I remember that after I made the listing for the desk, it took a couple of days before I got any responses. When I did, I got a message from a man named Charlie. He said that he wanted to buy the desk. There wasn't a whole lot of conversation between us other than that. I was happy that somebody wanted to buy it, and I made sure that he was good with the price, which he said that he was. I thought the price was reasonable, so I was glad to hear that, and then I gave him my address. We agreed that he would come by the next evening at about 5 o'clock. And when the next evening rolled around, I had the desk just inside of my front door for Charlie to come and buy. He got there at about 5, and I let him inside of my house. Charlie was skinny with somewhat curly blondish hair. He was wearing a sweatshirt. After we said hi to each other, I showed Charlie the desk and I told him that I could help him take it to his car. Charlie went up close to the desk and looked at it. After a short time, he told me that the desk did not look like it did in the pictures. I asked him what he meant. I was very confused because it was exactly the same as the pictures. I had taken them just days prior when I had listed the desk, and I really hadn't touched it since. Charlie said that it just wasn't how he thought it would be. Then he said that he decided not to buy it. I was disappointed, but I said okay. Then he turned and left. I was confused by what he had said. I'm not sure what exactly he was expecting, because in my opinion, the desk was just as it was advertised in the listing. I decided to just move on, and hopefully somebody else would want to buy it. So the night went on, and I ended up staying up pretty late. It was nearly midnight. I was in the other room. and I heard the sound suddenly of somebody trying to open the front door. When I heard this, I walked over and looked out of a front window. I saw a man standing there, wearing a hat that was mostly covering his face. But I then realized that this was Charlie. I didn't know what he was doing. After literally trying to open my front door, he then walked away, but he didn't leave. Instead, he walked around to the back side of the house. He tried that door, which thankfully was locked. After that, things were quiet for a bit. Then he returned to the front. This time, he actually knocked on the front door of the house, but I was not going to answer it. After being at the front door, he moved to several windows. It seemed like he was trying to look inside. I had covers for most of them, but I could still see his shadow on the other side. After he was still in my yard prowling around for that long, I decided to call the police. I told them the whole story, and within 10 minutes, an officer was there. Meanwhile, Charlie had stayed there the whole time. When the police arrived, he tried running, but was quickly caught. He did not break in, and I think he ended up getting off for the most part. I have to think, though, that he was trying to find a good place to break into my house. I'm really glad that he didn't. This story happened when I was in college. I was a graduate student living on campus about an hour away from my parents' house. When the week of Thanksgiving came, I went home after classes on Monday. We had the whole rest of the week off, so I would be staying at my parents' house for a little while. When I got back home, the second day, during the night, I was sleeping in my bedroom when I was awoken. Now, my bedroom is on the first floor, and it's on the front side of the house. It was the middle of the night, and I thought that I heard the sound of a knocking on my window. It was really creepy. I sat up in bed and looked over to the window. There was a curtain covering it, so I couldn't really see anything. I did not hear the knocking again, so I got up, walked over to the window, and looked out of it. When I looked around the yard, everything seemed fine, and I didn't notice anything. I still didn't know what made the sound, though. I went back to my bed and sat down, still looking in the direction of the window. That's when I saw something move past the window only for a brief second. I couldn't see any details because I really just saw the shadow from the other side of the curtains, but somebody had definitely walked past outside. I got up again, ran over to the window, and looked out. Whoever it was gone again. I glanced all around the yard of what I could see, but I never saw anything at all. I went back to my bed again and sat back down and didn't see anything for the next few minutes. I didn't know exactly what was going on. After it seemed like things were back to normal, I tried to go back to sleep again. I laid down and closed my eyes. A few minutes later, when I was starting to fall asleep, I heard knocking again on the window. There was no mistaking it. I sat up and saw that somebody was right outside. I couldn't tell who they were because my curtains were still closed. I could just see like a silhouette of their figure. It looked to be a man. Then I heard what sounded like a faint laughter coming from the other side of the window. It was really creepy. I turned on all of the lights to my bedroom and then saw the guy finally moving away. He left my sight, and when I got to the window, he was gone again. Somebody was definitely messing with me, but I didn't know who or why. I stayed up for quite a while before finally was able to go back to sleep. The next day, I told my parents about it. We were unsure of what could be done. There were no signs of an attempted break-in. I couldn't even give a description of the man. We just hoped that it wouldn't happen again. The next day went by as normal, but that night I stayed up late watching TV in the living room with my parents. It was a little bit after midnight when we all heard a noise coming from the other room. We all got up at once and went over to a window. From there, though, we couldn't see anything. We heard the noise again. Now it was more clear that somebody was hitting my bedroom window. We called the police and then moved as far to the other side of the house as we could. We heard another noise. After that, things were quiet for a while. The police arrived really fast, though. When they got there, they found a man hiding in our backyard. None of us knew who he was. The guy had been trying to break into our house through my bedroom window. The window hadn't even broke, though, but there were some marks on it. I'm really glad that he didn't get in. I'm also really glad that I was not in my bedroom at the time, but with my parents in the living room. It had to be the same guy who had been there the night before. Since this happened, every year when I go back to my parents for Thanksgiving, we joke around about it. At the time, it wasn't so funny though, and I'm really glad that everyone is okay. It started one Saturday afternoon when I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through social media. I switched to a new phone and a new number a few months ago. My old number was still active, but I didn't think much of it because it had been quiet. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, and when I looked down, I saw it was a text from my old number. The message read, "I see you." It was odd because I thought it was just some spam or a wrong number, so I shrugged it off. A few hours later, another message came through saying, "You don't remember me?" I had forgotten to change my number on a few accounts, so it was possible that somebody had gotten a hold of it. I decided to reply, trying to keep it light, and I typed back, "Who is this?" The response was quick and said, "You know who I am." I didn't want to engage further, so I put my phone down and tried to watch a movie, but the messages nagged at the back of my mind. The next day, the texts continued, saying more creepy and odd things. I stopped replying for a while. Monday brought more messages, saying things such as, "I'm closer than you think," and "You'll remember me soon." I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? Somebody is texting me creepy things from my old number? It felt ridiculous. By Tuesday, I was on edge, and I couldn't focus at work. The messages were escalating, saying, "I know what you did last summer," and kept repeating, "You'll remember soon." I tried to block the number, but it kept coming through, so I finally decided to involve the police and see if they could do anything. I explained the situation, and they filed a report. The messages continued for all the next week, and I tried to ignore them as best as I could. I finally got a call from the police a week later. They had traced the text back to an old acquaintance from high school, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. He had been using some sort of app to send the messages from my old number. That night, I confronted him at his house, and his parents answered the door, so it ended up working out perfectly to involve them as well. It was awesome to see his face when he came downstairs and saw me talking to his parents and showing texts that he had sent to me. So that was the last problem I had with the kid, but it was still scary before I knew who was behind it all. This happened last year and still creeps me out when I think of it. So I was at home one night by myself. I was just in my bedroom scrolling through my phone. All of a sudden, I saw this Snapchat notification from a name that I did not recognize. I was curious, so I went to Snapchat and opened the snap to see. It was a selfie of what appeared to be a man. However, this photo was taken extremely close to his face, and he also appeared to be in a very dark room. I could barely see his face at all, and didn't recognize it to be anybody that I knew. The picture honestly looked very creepy. There was no words with the picture, and that was it. I guess at some point, I must have become friends with this guy. I didn't know when though. I had Snapchat for probably 10 years. I did not send a picture back, but instead typed a message for the guy, asking who he was. Then he sent another photo. When I opened it, I saw that it was much like the one before. It was honestly so creepy. I wish I would have screenshotted it, but I didn't. I thought that maybe the person sent a picture like this by mistake, but after the second one, I realized that it was not. I asked again who it was. The person's response, though, really shocked me. He simply said, "I'm coming over now." I thought that he had to be joking, but I also realized then that I had my location on Snapchat. I quickly went into the settings and turned my location off. If this guy was serious, I was hoping that he would not know where I was. Then I blocked the mysterious guy. I thought that was it. I returned to what I was doing, but I couldn't help but feel a little bit creeped out by the whole thing. Well, roughly 30 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. I had a terrible feeling instantly. I think by now it was like 10-something at night. Not a normal time for somebody to come to the door. I carefully left my bedroom and went down the hallway. Eventually, I got to a window that I could look out and see who was there. When I did, I saw a man wearing a ski mask standing there. I couldn't believe it. The guy must have got my location before I had turned it off. I watched him knock on the door again. Then he started to look around. When he did, I quickly moved back and away from the window. I heard the guy walk off the step, but did not know where he was going to. The next thing I knew, I heard him right outside one of the main windows. I ran back into my bedroom and then called the police. I locked my bedroom door and covered my window. Then I just waited. I did not hear anything during this time. I wasn't sure what was going on, if he was trying to break in or maybe if he left. About 10 minutes later is when the cops arrived. They came to the front door and I told them about what happened. They offered to look around, and I almost said that they didn't have to, but I ended up saying sure. Then they looked around my backyard and surprisingly found the man hiding in some bushes. When they located him, they asked him to come out. He ignored them and then tried to run. However, the police caught up with him before he left the yard. It was the same guy who had been Snapchatting me. I'm not sure what his plans were. I'm just glad that he was caught. So, me and my friends used to have this group chat that was mostly for sending stupid memes. Occasionally, we'd talk about hanging out, but it was always the same thing. People would say, yeah, for sure, and then never actually hang out. The group was me, Emily, David, and Ryan. Ryan was your typical guy, always getting into weird situations and trouble. He was constantly meeting sketchy people on eBay or Craigslist, trying to make a quick buck off random stuff he had lying around. One day, Ryan was selling his four-wheeler, and asked us to come with him because he didn't trust the buyer. We told him, if you don't trust him, why sell it to him in the first place? But Ryan didn't get what we were trying to say. He barely even acknowledged that it was a red flag. We were all confused as to why he wasn't seeing what seemed obvious to us. We told him to just leave it and wait until he could find a more trustworthy buyer, but he didn't listen. He told us the deal was on the south side of the city, which was the sketchiest area imaginable. That side of town was notorious for crime and kidnappings. That was the biggest red flag of all. None of us wanted to go, but Ryan wouldn't listen. Throughout the day, he was snapping us updates about getting his stuff ready and making progress on the sale. I messaged one of the other friends in the group chat privately and told them, I don't think we should let him go over there. They replied, why not? He's a grown man. If he gets into trouble, that's on him. We warned him. I thought that was a pretty stupid reason to abandon a friend who might get himself into serious trouble. No one else was listening to me though, and they insisted I was overreacting. They said if Ryan needed to learn a lesson, then so be it. Hours went by, and Ryan was at the person's house. We kept checking up on him because, like I said, the whole thing felt wrong. He kept snapping us back, reassuring us that everything was fine and that we were overreacting. But still, we couldn't relax until we knew he was safe. Then he sent a snap of himself in a basement. We all thought, why are you in their basement? Someone even commented, what are you doing down there? But he didn't respond, which was really odd. I figured maybe he was busy talking to the buyer and just wanted to update us. But then he snapped another picture from a different room in the basement. It was getting weirder and weirder each snap. Still, we ignored it because we figured if he was snapping us, he must be okay. The next snap was in a dark room showing someone's feet, but they weren't Ryan's feet. That's when we realized someone else had taken Ryan's phone and had been snapping us the whole time, pretending everything was fine. We started panicking. We tried to check his location, but the person who had his phone turned it off. We knew something was seriously wrong and that we needed to act fast, but we didn't know what to do. We tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. We thought about contacting his family, but none of us knew them. We were stuck. Someone suggested driving to the area to try to find his car, but we knew that could take hours and maybe even days, and it wasn't a guaranteed plan because we didn't even know the location. The next snap came in and I nearly lost it. It was a photo of fresh blood on the floor, wet, bright red, and horrifying. We all froze. That's when we realized we weren't just overreacting. Something terrible had happened. We immediately FaceTimed each other and tried calling the police from someone else's phone. But without any concrete evidence or location, we couldn't do much. We were completely out of luck. We all went to bed that night, frantic and unable to sleep. Days and weeks passed, and we didn't hear a thing from Ryan. Then, about 6 months later, we saw his face on the news. He'd been reported missing. I thought to myself, if we had just gone with him or stopped him, maybe we could have done something. After months of searching, the police gave up. Then, out of nowhere, someone found Ryan walking down the highway in nothing but his underwear and shoes. He looked starved, barely alive. When we finally got the full story in the group chat, we couldn't believe what had happened. To be honest, I can't even talk about it. It's too gruesome and traumatizing. I'm just glad that Ryan is alive. A couple of years ago, my phone broke. It had been pretty old, and I was sort of meaning to get a new one. But after breaking, I had to find a new one fast. I thought about going to the store or looking online. But to try to save some money, I went on Facebook Marketplace. I also wanted to get one as fast as possible. I had heard there were a lot of good cell phones there for cheap. After maybe 30 minutes of looking, I found one. It was the same phone that I had before, but a few generations newer. The price also seemed very cheap compared to what it would be elsewhere. So at that point, I decided to send the seller a message saying that I wanted to buy the phone. Now, the seller's Facebook account was pretty mysterious. Their name was just JM. I clicked on their profile, and they did not have a profile picture. There wasn't much information about them either. Still, I didn't think that was too big of a deal, and I contacted them. It did not take long before I heard back. The seller, Jay, I guess, told me that I could buy the phone as soon as that night, and I agreed. I suggested that we meet at a local shopping center. However, Jay said they could not do that because they had kids and could not leave their house. Instead, I was supposed to come over that night. I said okay, and I agreed to it. I understood that people with kids probably wouldn't be able to just go whenever. So I was given an address, and that night I drove to it. It took maybe 15 minutes to get there. It was a little bit far away in an area that I had never been before. When I got to the address, I saw that it was a house that looked slightly run down, and there didn't appear to be any lights on inside. The whole neighborhood looked a little bit run down, and the houses had fairly large properties. I had no way of texting the seller that I was there because of my phone being broken, but I had my watch, and I was right on time for when we agreed. So I walked up to the front step and rang the doorbell. After maybe 30 seconds, the door started to open. There were two doors, a screen door and then an actual one. The inside door opened just a few inches, and I saw a woman was standing behind it. She told me to go around to the back and then close the door. So I walked around to behind the house and then entered a back door there. This led into a dimly lit kitchen area. The woman was there inside and sitting at a table. I entered and then sat down across from her. It appeared as though every light in the rest of the house was off. We both just sat there in awkward silence for a few moments. Then I mentioned the phone, saying I would like to buy it. The woman said that she would go and get the phone and got up. I kept sitting at the table. She left the room and I waited at the table. The whole thing so far had seemed really strange. As I looked around, I saw no signs of her having kids. So I waited at the table for at least a good 5 minutes. I didn't know what was taking so long. Did she lose the phone or something? I decided to ask. I called out asking if she was okay, and she called back from the other room saying yes, and it would just be a moment. So I kept sitting there, but then at least 5 more minutes went by. I was starting to feel nervous. It was just really strange. When she left the room, she didn't turn any other lights on either. I could barely see around the kitchen as it was. Eventually, I got impatient and I stood up. I walked to the end of the kitchen and to the entrance of what appeared to be the living room. There was no sign of the woman. I called out again, asking what was taking so long. This time, though, I got no response. I kept standing there looking into the living room, and there was a hallway at the end of it. It was really dark, like I said, but after standing there for like a minute, I thought I saw the woman cross the hallway. She did not bother to say anything or acknowledge me. This was really weird. I walked back into the kitchen. I thought about things, and then I decided to just leave. This whole situation was creeping me out, and I didn't know what was going on. So I walked over to the back door, left, and then walked back out to my car. When I did, I looked back at the house. I saw now that one of the lights was on in a front window which hadn't been before. The woman was looking out of that window and staring at me from inside. It just really creeped me out. I got back inside of my car and drove home. After that, I went and bought a cell phone from the store. This story takes place in the fall of 2016, right in the heat of the whole killer clown thing that was going on for a while. My cousin and I were both in middle school at the time, and I was staying over at his house one night. There were quite a few people in the house that night, including us, my aunt and uncle, and my younger cousins. It will be easier to understand the story by explaining the layout of the house and yard first. They lived in a rather large double-wide trailer that they bought that was positioned on a flattened part of a hill. Their driveway is a rather steep gravel slope that connected to the road at the bottom of the hill. Behind the house and up the hill was nothing but woods. My cousin and I were the only ones still awake this night, watching TV in the living room. We kept hearing noises in the woods behind the house. We could see into the woods from the window in the living room where we were sitting, but we didn't pay much attention to the noises since it was kind of windy. Plus, my uncle had lots of motion lights outside the house. The motion lights were positioned in the back facing the woods, the side door close to the driveway on the opposite side of the house, and on the porch that overlooked the front yard and the road. Because of all the motion lights, we weren't too worried about anyone or anything being outside, since anything out there would trigger the lights. We had heard lots of stories and watched lots of YouTube videos about the whole killer clown thing that was popular at the time. Personally, I didn't think that it was real. I thought it was just prank videos. Also, we live in a small town in northeast Tennessee where everyone owned some sort of firearm, including my uncle. We were never afraid of anyone dressing up as a clown and trying anything. The only lights on in the house were the TV and the dim light up above the kitchen sink that was only a few feet behind the couch. Suddenly, the motion detector light in the backyard turned on. We noticed, but we didn't think anything of it. The lights were set on a 10-minute timer, and if it detected movement, it would stay on and turn off after 10 minutes if no other movement was detected. After 10 minutes, they went back off, so we figured that it was just an animal, which wasn't uncommon. After about 20 minutes, I went to the bathroom down the hall. I did my business and washed my hands. But when I came out of the bathroom, the motion light on the side of the house by the side door that entered into the laundry room turned on. I could see it shining through the thin blinds that were on the door. I heard what sounded like footsteps on the gravel outside, and then the doorknob started rattling quickly like somebody was trying to open it. Luckily, the blinds were shut, so whoever it was didn't see me. I ran back into the living room to tell my cousin. My cousin had heard the same thing I did, because he was already up and halfway into his dad's room to wake him up. At that point, I saw the light from the front porch come on, so I got up to look out the window that looked out to the porch, but I couldn't see anything. My uncle had quickly grabbed his pistol and a flashlight and was out on the front porch looking for whoever or whatever it was. My cousin and I were behind him on the porch watching. He looked around with the flashlight for a bit, and eventually we saw something. There at the bottom of the hill in the ditch by the road was someone dressed up as a clown in a cheap-looking costume. The clown was facing up the hill towards us, and it just looked at us and waved. My uncle fired a warning shot, and the clown ran across the road and into the woods. My cousin and I didn't sleep anymore that night, while my uncle stayed out on the porch for a few more hours to make sure that nobody came back. I don't doubt that it could have just been a high school kid playing a prank trying to scare whoever was in the house. After reading some more experiences with these clowns of people's lives actually being threatened and endangered, it still scares me to think of what the clown would have tried to do if he was able to get inside the house.